Robert, welcome back to the program. How are you, sir?
Man, great to talk to you.
It's great to talk to you. Can you remind me, you were on with us after Monuments Men, and you talked about this great service that is still going on, where people that they were still looking for paintings and pieces of art that had been taken by the Nazis. And if I remember right, didn't somebody in our own audience reach out to you and say, I think we found one of those paintings?
Yes, sir, absolutely. The Glenn Beck audience, and Glenn Beck, you yourself deserve a lot of credit, because I hadn't walked out of your studio last time, in Dallas, out at Las Colinas, headed back to our office, the Monuments Men and Women Foundation office, before someone in my office contacted me and said, we've already had a lead as a result of your interview with Glenn. And it turned out that there was someone whose aunt had been given two paintings during World War II. She'd worked for the government overseas in Germany, and these two paintings were missing. We were able to identify who the rightful owner was and get them back. So it's a great service you perform, and it's a magnificent conclusion to obviously a very difficult part of history.
What was it like to give that back to the family?
It was a deeply moving experience. The foundation's found and returned more than 40 works of art, from paintings, documents, ancient books, tapestries, to museums, individual collectors, and so on. And, when we see, oftentimes the people just stand there and they cry. They don't even know what to say, because they may have worked 50 or 60 years trying to find some work of art that's been missing, and they haven't even had leads. And to see us standing there with something that belongs to them, not asking for anything in return, don't charge anybody for doing it, because we feel like everyone that went through World War II has already paid enough.
Yeah, right.
Words just fail. It's just pure gratitude.
I can't wait for you to tell this new story. Tell me the story of the caretakers.
Well, Remember Us is a story that found me just as Monuments Men did. I had written about in the Monuments Men. I told the story of two Monuments officers who were killed in combat, one British soldier and one American, Walter Hutchhausen. And Hutchhausen was killed. Nobody wants to be the last casualty of the war. He was killed in the last month of World War II, and is buried in the Netherlands American Cemetery in Margraten in the Netherlands. I knew that story, and I'd made mention of a young girl who wrote Harvard in September 45, asking for the address of his mother, wanting to write her and tell her that she walked 5 miles several times a week from her house to the American Military Cemetery, it was called then, to put flowers on his grave, because her family knew him and they were grief-stricken to hear that he'd been killed. And I knew that story too. I mentioned that. And then in 2015, the nephew of Hutchhausen wrote me and included a photograph with this elderly lady with this crown of white hair. And he said, here's a photo with Frida. And I couldn't place who this was. I had no idea who it was. And I realized, my God, this is that 19-year-old girl who's still alive. And so I flew to England. She'd married a British soldier after the war. And I went to meet with her. And she started showing me photographs of when the Americans liberated her area of the Netherlands, and all these American soldiers that they knew. And she said, you know about the American Military Cemetery? And I said, yes. And she said, have you been there? And I said, yes. And she said, so you know about the grave adoption program? And I said, the what? And she said, the grave adoption program. And I said, I have no idea what you're talking about. So I started doing some research on this and learned that at the end of World War II, our largest World War II cemetery in Europe was not Normandy. It was the Netherlands American Cemetery in Margraten. There were 17,800 boys and a few women buried at this cemetery by May 1946. And by that time, every single grave had a Dutch person, a local person, who'd volunteered to be an adopter of that grave, go out there on the birth and death date of the soldier, Veterans Day, Memorial Day, and if they had the contact information for the next of kin, send them a photograph of the grave and a letter, because they realized it was all well and good to adopt the bodies of of dead boys, but where the real need was to reach across the ocean into the American homes and try and assuage the grief of the families. And they knew some of these boys, and I found it the most heartwarming, uplifting, and certainly unique conclusion to a World War II story that I think's been written.
So are they still, some of them still doing this?
Not some. In fact, there were about in 1947-48, American families were given the choice to have their loved ones sent home or to be left overseas in a military cemetery. The Army had no idea how many families would want their boys sent home, and as a consequence, they couldn't tell how many cemeteries they would need. General Eisenhower actually thought almost everybody would want to have their family members sent home, but it turned out not to be the case. So about 61% came home, about 39% stayed in Europe, which was about the numbers from World War I, although the numbers in this area of the Netherlands were higher. The graves that are there now, there are 10,000 boys there and 4 women, 8,300 graves, 1,700 names on the walls of the missing. Every one of them has an adopter. For 80 years, all those graves have been adopted without interruption. There's a waiting list of almost 1,000 people in the Netherlands to become adopters. This is not just a duty, but a privilege, because they take their kids out to the cemetery. They've turned the cemetery into a classroom. And you go out there, and yes, there's a somber element, but they're instilling in their kids, you're able to think and say what you want to because of the freedom that was given to you by this American boy or girl. And we don't do that in our country anymore.
So this is one of the most incredible stories that I've ever heard, and I'm shocked that the world doesn't know this. Is there anything like this anywhere else in the world?
No, we couldn't even find a comp, of any nature. That is not to say that the people in the Normandy area don't care about our boys in Normandy or other cemeteries. They do, of course, as do the Belgians in Henri Chapelle and other cemeteries. But there's no place that created an organic grave adoption program during the war in January 1945. These people in this area of the Netherlands were so grateful, having been neutral during World War I and having not lost their freedom for 100 years, and they didn't like it. And when the Americans liberated them in September 44, I'll never forget this woman, Frida, this elderly woman I met, looked at me the first time I interviewed her. I knew her for 8 years, the last 8 years of her life. I delivered her eulogy 2 summers ago. She looked at me, 88 years old, but they were the eyes of the 19-year-old. And she said, when I saw that first tank come over the hill and I realized we were saved, I looked at my dad and I said, Poppy, these American boys have come all the way across the ocean to save us. And there were tears in her eyes because they couldn't imagine how we could have moved that equipment across the ocean and why we would have cared so much. So there isn't anything like it. But in January 45, these people in this little town of Margraten, a mile from the cemetery, organized a meeting of the town leaders. The town's only got 1,200 people. And they were trying to find an answer to the question, how do you thank your liberators when they're no longer alive to thank? And they came up with this idea of this grave adoption program. And it's a story that I tell following the lives of about 12 different American combat soldiers, Medal of Honor recipients, tankers, gravedigger, because we don't know that story. We don't know what happens to an American soldier when they're killed on the field of battle because it's depressing. We move on to the next scene in a movie. Well, I want people to know. You started your program with freedom's not free. It's ugly. Let's talk about what the cost is. Let's talk about the stripping line that the body goes through and the removal of dog tags, one being put in the mouth if there's still a head, and the other being nailed to the cross because they don't have time to stencil the names on yet. Let's talk about that and let people know it's not just a Marvel movie or a Game Boy. This is real. This is painful. And, of course, at the end of the war, when we Americans declare victory and move on with our lives, there's millions of family members in the United States whose lives will never be the same. So it's still happening today. Still happening today.
The name of the book is Remember Us, and take us. I mean, because that's really kind of the beauty of it. Take us through the rest of the book just briefly. It starts with what?
Well, I begin with what it was, how nice life was in the Netherlands until May 10, 1940. And the Netherlands doesn't get much attention during World War II, and yet everybody's heard of Battle of the Bulge, Battle of Hurtgen Forest, Operation Market Garden. Those are all within 50 miles of where we're talking about. They happen all around there. And, of course, World War II in Western Europe begins right here in this area because the German tanks roll across the border. So I cover the lives of these 12 different Americans. I've interviewed all their family members. Some make it through the war. Some don't. We read the book and find out who make it, who doesn't. But their lives converge around this area of the Netherlands. And when most World War II stories end with the war being over, Remember Us kicks into a transcendent moment when the Dutch come up with this idea of this grave adoption program. The Americans refuse to provide the names and addresses of the next of kin. So they're foiled with trying to achieve their ultimate objective, which is to try and contact all the American families. And frustrated, there was one of the key figures in the book, a woman who's the mother of 12 children, who takes it upon herself. She's a woman of action. She writes President Truman and pleads for him to get involved. And when that doesn't work, she gets on the first airplane she's ever flown on. She leaves her kids behind. She flies to New York and lands at LaGuardia Field. She goes to Washington and meets some members of Congress, including a young guy from Texas named Lyndon Johnson, who says, "Young lady, you need to go to Texas because there were so many military bases there." She flies to our hometown and lands at Love Field in June 1946 and is met by two family members. And for 5 weeks, she lives with American families who've lost somebody during the war, and to each of them she says, "Leave your boys with us. When the election comes, we will watch over them like our own forever." And they have done that. Now today, these 10,000 Dutch adopters only have contact information for 20% of the American families. They couldn't ever get the others. So the Monuments Men and Women Foundation.
You have a list?
Yep. The Monuments Men and Women Foundations entered into a joint venture with the Dutch Foundation for Adopting Graves, not charging anybody for this. And we've created a website called foreverpromise.org. And on that website is a list of all 10,000 men and women, the 4 women that are buried at the cemetery or whose names are on the walls of the missing. And it's a searchable database. We're asking people to go and see, do you have someone you know or a relative that's buried there? And if so, we have a short questionnaire. What's your relationship? Are you aware there's a grave adoption program? Are you in contact with your adopter? Would you like to be? Will you allow us to share your contact information? I connected a lady from Richmond, Texas, Saturday night to this young family that's the adopter of her brother. She's 93 years old. And she was in tears at the thought that when she leaves this world, there'll be someone there to watch over her brother. And that's what we're all about, is this connecting.
Robert, I have to tell you, you've really done something with your life. I mean, I know you don't need me to say it, but what a great job that you have, and what a great service you have done for so many years. Thank you so much. Please look this up, the Forever Promise Project. You can find it at foreverpromise.org, foreverpromise.org. Robert Edsel is the author's name. The book is Remember Us. It is a perfect read for this week.